Hello everyone, thank you for being here. As you will have just seen in the intro, I completed 2 big projects in January. The first one is this petite knit Stockholm sweater V-neck. I knit this with Knit Picks Wool of the Andes in their sport weight, and the colorway is Wonderland Heather. It's a really beautiful color. There are flecks of a brighter blue in it, and it's really soft. So for the Stockholm sweater V-neck, the size chart put me at a small, and I chose to make a medium. I just wanted to have a little bit more ease. And overall, I think that the pattern was really easy to follow, and it went fairly quickly. Yeah, I really enjoyed making this one, and I think that it's going to be a good year-round sweater. I think the lighter kind of icy blue-green color suits all seasons, so I'm really happy with this project. The second big project that I completed in January was this pair of cream or ecru Helene jeans. The fabric that I used for this pair is a 13-ounce 100% cotton bull denim from Fashion Fabrics Club. I discovered Fashion Fabrics Club at the end of 2023, and I've been really pleased with the affordable but high quality fabrics. So this denim is really nice. It's thick, but it's also soft, and it has some drape to it. I made the straight leg view of the Helene jeans, and I did the button fly, which is my preference, both for wearing and for longevity. And I made the size 4, which is where my measurements put me on the chart. I chose to do a 32-inch inseam so that I had the option to do a turn-up at the bottom, which is just a style that I enjoy. But the 32-inch also sits comfortably when it's unfolded as well. It's not touching the ground or anything. So I was very pleased to have made these. If you watched my Make 9 2024 plans video, you'll know that a pair of ecru Helene jeans was on the list. So first completed Make 9 project of 2024. I also finally put buttons on this Nicole's waistcoat that I made in December, which is great. Now I can comfortably wear it out. It looked a little bit silly without the buttons on, but this is a Nicole's men's pattern. It's M8415. I made the size small, so not a sewing project done in January, but I did finally sew on the buttons and make the buttonholes, which is always the last step. So there's that one. Next up, I'm going to share what I read in January. I've had a few of you ask if I could do a little book chat. I often film videos in front of my wall of books in the living room upstairs. So I thought it would be fun to share the books that I read in January. And if that's not your jam and you're just here for the crafting, then thank you so much for being here. But I'm going to go ahead and share with you what I read in January. My Goodreads goal for 2024 is to read 50 books. I've done more in the past. I've done less in the past, but in 2024, I want to be really intentional about reading regularly and hopefully finish about a book a week. So in January, I finished 4 books, one of which I carried over from December, and then I have one that I'm almost done with. So doing good so far, about one a week. And I thought it would be fun to share with you what I've been reading. The first book that I finished in January is Warlight by Michael Ondaatje. This book is set in 1945 London post-war, and basically it follows the story of 2 teenagers whose parents abandoned them into the care of a strange character called the Moth. The parents are both active in war-related activities, the kids think, but they really have no idea, and they don't know this Moth character or any of the other kind of strange characters that surround him and that all of a sudden have filled their home. And it kind of follows them as they grow up in a state of confusion, turmoil, like they suspect the Moth might be a criminal, and all of a sudden are in the care of this group of strange people that they somehow think are trying to protect them from a mysterious threat. And the latter part of the book, the boy, his name is Michael, it's like a decade later, and he sort of unpacks the story. He finds out what was really going on, both with his parents and with the people that he was entrusted into their care. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very strange one. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads, and honestly, I think it was fine. I had just finished reading one of Michael Ondaatje's more famous books in December, and that was The English Patient. And I absolutely loved that one. I felt like the way that it was written really drew you into the story. You were really invested in the characters, and I felt like reading it was watching a film. Like you were really immersed in that one, and the language of it was beautiful. I think I gave The English Patient a 5-star review. And so picking up this from Ondaatje right after that, it just sort of fell flat in comparison. So that's the first book of January. The second book that I finished in January was The Seas by Samantha Hunt. This book is a little bit strange, and the basic premise of the book is that there's a teenage girl living in a northern seaside town, and her father has drowned, and so she's in a big old house with her mother and her grandfather, and she's quite isolated. She has like an obsessive love for an older guy who's just gotten back from Iraq, who is very depressed and who's a heavy drinker. And as sort of a way to understand what's going on, I guess, she thinks that she's a mermaid. She fully believes that she has come from the sea, and she is obsessed with water, and she's obsessed with the color blue. And she, goes through her day-to-day life very much believing that her true home is in the sea. And yeah, it's a really interesting look at like loneliness, isolation, grief, loss. But the way that it's written, it really blurs the reality to the like emotional, possibly mental unstable bits. And so they kind of weave together, and it feels like a fluid, believable thing. You can get immersed in the story, and the fact that she thinks she's a mermaid doesn't like pull you out of it.
So yeah, I think this one got a 3 or a 4, and it has a very specific audience probably, but it was an enjoyable read. Okay. The third book that I read in January was Dead End Memories by Banana Yoshimoto. And similar to the Ondaatje novel that I mentioned, I had just read a different book by Banana Yoshimoto called Kitchen. And Kitchen is probably the one she's most famous for. She was working as a waitress when she wrote and had her first book published, and it sort of immediately became an international bestseller. And I read that in December and I loved it. And so I picked up this book of short stories. It's 5 stories about 5 different women, and each story sort of shows kind of like a woman going through normal life, but in a way healing from something. Kitchen is largely about grief, and a lot of these stories have that as a similar theme. But the writing is quiet, and it's efficient, and it feels like day-to-day life, and you do care about the characters. And I enjoyed the stories. I just feel like in comparison to how much I loved Kitchen, this one felt like a little bit shy of that one. So the fourth book I read in January was I Is Another by John Fosse. He's a Norwegian author, and this is the second book in a series of 3 physical books, but the whole series is called the Septology, so it's a series of 7 like parts of the story, and this second physical book has parts 3 to 5. And it's a really interesting premise for this series. It's about a Norwegian man living on the coast, another small seaside town setting, which I really enjoy. But there's actually 2 men in the story that have the same name, and they're both painters. And the main narrating voice is a man who has, like I said, grown up on the coast and become a painter, but then he marries and he and his wife move to a house a couple of hours north of the city, and she passes away. And so the context, the perspective that you get is this old man's kind of thoughts and musings and ramblings, and he doesn't have a lot of contact with other people aside from his one neighbor in the small area where he lives and the gallery owner in the city who sells his paintings. There's a lot of memory interspersed, like bits of childhood come up, memories of his wife. Yeah, and it just feels like stream of consciousness. There's a lot of repetition, and he's sort of grappling with his life and where he is at as an old man. But the twist is that in the city near the gallery, there's another man, as I mentioned, and he has the same name, and he's a painter. The difference being that he continues to live in the city and he becomes an alcoholic, and he lives alone with his dog, and he really struggles day to day just to function. He's really like gotten into a dark space. And so as a reader, you're sort of wondering if this is one man contemplating what his life may have been had he not gotten married and moved out of the city, if he had just stayed there and been alone. But it's a little bit blurry, and again, heavy focus on memory and on painting and loss. Yeah, it's a really interesting read, and I'm looking forward to finishing the next one, the final volume in this series. So that's everything that I read in January. Oh wait, there's one more. Hang on. Okay, so the final book that I've been reading in January that I'm almost finished with is it's called Geek Love, and it's by Catherine Dunn. This book has been mentioned by a few like YouTube book reviewers recently. It's not a new book. I think it was published in the 80s, maybe. I'd have to check that. But anyway, Geek Love by Catherine Dunn is about a couple who are involved in a traveling like carnival circus sort of freak show, and a few of the acts kind of like fall off, and so they decide that they're going to have children, and that while the while the woman is pregnant, she takes lots of drugs, lots of chemicals like arsenic. There's so much happening, but their intention is for her to have children with deformities so that they can be acts in the freak show and their traveling carnival, which is how they make a living. It's kind of a crazy premise, and it took me a minute to get into it. It took me a minute to get into this world, and the children have really strange deformities. Like one of them has fins, like a fish. There are two twin girls who share a lower half, but they have separate torsos and heads. And there's a baby who has like telekinetic powers. So you follow this family around as they travel in their traveling carnival, and you kind of just watch the dynamic of children who are deformed and who are kind of forced to be competitive in how much money they can bring in by showcasing their deformity, by performing. And to see that level of competition as well as the relationships between the children and the parents, it's a really interesting look at like what is normal and what is strange, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. It's a strange one. But I think where it began to become interesting to me was when the children start to get a little bit older and develop more autonomy, and they start to like think about what life is going to be like for themselves as individuals. At the same time, they're sort of seeing the family carnival and their parents themselves like age and kind of fall apart. And those sections I've really enjoyed. I think that the language of this book is really good. It's easy to read. It's smart. It's like quick. The characters themselves are very interesting, and you do get invested in them, but there's just a level of strangeness. There's a level of like, you have to get into it. You kind of have to get past the weird, and then once you're there, you see the humanity of it, of course, as you always do with novels. But yeah, it wasn't at all what I was expecting, and I'm glad to have read it. I don't know if I would read it again. I know some people absolutely love this novel, so that's the one that I'm almost finished with for January.
Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please let me know in the comments what projects you have been working on in January. And if you read any good books, please let me know what those were as well. I love getting book recommendations. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider giving a like and a subscribe, as it really helps out my channel. And I will see you in the next one.